Welcome to the Whitwam Wealth Real Estate Podcast. And today our topic is single-family investing options.
Welcome to the Whitwam Wealth Real Estate Podcast with Scott Whitwam, your blueprint to financial abundance. Settle in as we explore the mindset and methods for wealth building through real estate.
Okay, so let's move on to number 3, which is wholesale real estate. So somebody asked me, what is the difference between wholesale and fix and flip? Well, wholesale is where you're purchasing a piece of property at a discount with the intention of selling it to somebody else who's in the industry, who's probably going to do a fix and flip, or they're going to use it for a buy and hold. You're not selling it to a retail client, generally because you're buying properties at wholesale prices because they need something. There's either a big problem to fix, or there's a big condition issue that needs to be fixed in the property. So wholesalers are typically out trying to acquire properties with enough margin where they can sell this to another investor and make a profit, and then leave enough room so the investor can make a profit, and that way their property or their wholesale transaction is a viable product to sell. So what are some of the pros and cons with wholesale real estate? Let's start with the pros. Number 1, low capital requirement. This is one of the things I do like about wholesale real estate. If you do wholesale real estate correctly, you need very little capital. You may need, we'll just say, a few $100s to cover some earnest money. Because again, on most of the wholesale transactions, we try to negotiate $100 earnest money with the contract. Somebody told me one time, he said, there's no way you can buy a property with $100 earnest money. Well, we just had somebody a few weeks ago in here in studio in the podcast, and they shared how they did the system using that very methodology and was only required to put $100 down. We've got a property we're getting ready to close this next week, $100 down. And we're going to keep this one. So it's not actually a wholesale. We're actually going to flip it, and it's a big development deal. But this is a development project. It's about a $1.2 to $1.4 million project with $100 in earnest money. So wholesale, you can do low capital. We purchased it as a wholesale and looked at it and said, hey, let's keep it. So when you go into wholesale, you generally have low down payment. And when you're dealing direct with sellers, many times sellers, they're not asking for any particular amount of earnest money. So if you offer them 1% of the purchase price, or you offer them $5,000 or $10,000 in earnest money, that is because you thought you needed to do that. And maybe it's something, if you were in real estate for a long time, maybe you thought that's something you have to do. But you can get into wholesale real estate with low earnest money requirements. And again, we teach how to do that in our coaching programs. So low capital is a good thing on the wholesale side of real estate. The other thing, number 2, would be minimal risk. If your wholesale contract is written property, there's very little risk. We write our wholesale contracts so that we can cancel anytime with no risk, get our full $100 earnest money back. But we also have a clause in there that says if we did everything wrong, we blew this whole transaction, and we're totally responsible for the reason why this thing isn't going to close, the only penalty that we suffer is the loss of that $100 earnest money. I call that minimal risk. That, if you're doing a $300,000, $400,000, $500,000, $600,000, $700,000 transaction, and the only risk you have in it is a potential $100 loss, that is minimal risk. And so the important thing, though, is to write your contract and make your offer subject so that it provides you minimal risk. And that is a benefit of doing wholesale transaction. The other benefit of wholesale transaction is quicker profits. Generally with wholesale transactions, because you're selling to other investors, you don't have 30 days to wait. So if you're, with a buy and hold, you're talking about long term, years of developing, passive income. With fix and flip, you're talking about 30, 60, 90 days to get the projects ready. And then your buyers are typically bringing 30 days worth of financing with them. And so it's still faster than a buy and hold, and you're making money much quicker, but it's still a considerable amount of time. With a wholesale deal, I get a wholesale property under contract today, and I put it out to my wholesale buyer list. I might have the thing sold by this afternoon or tomorrow, and because I'm getting an assignment fee, we can make that happen really quick. They write us a check for the assignment fee, we assign them the contract, or you can make the assignment fee paid through closing, but it's much quicker profits than what you're going to have on the retail side. So that's another great benefit of doing wholesale transactions, especially if you need quicker cash flow. So you got low out-of-pocket, low risk, and quicker profits. The fourth benefit is there's no property upkeep. With buy and hold and fix and flip, you certainly got property upkeep. You've got maintenance, repairs, you got upgrades and all that kind of stuff. With wholesale, you're not. You're passing all of the property upkeep, all of the repairs, all of the maintenance is being passed to the investor who's going to purchase this property from you. And so you get out from under any need to do any of the repairs. Now, I do know some wholesalers that'll go in and sometimes they'll do, some light property upkeep, some maintenance. If it's a hoarder home, they may want to make it so that people can actually get into the home, the investors who may be purchasing it. And there are times on the wholesale side that we've actually done whole clean outs and those type of things because we knew that it would be worth more as a wholesale property. But we can do those in, typically 3, 4, 5 days, and we can have the whole property cleaned out. And now the property is worth more money to sell to another investor. But there's really no property upkeep required on a true wholesale transaction. You're just acquiring the contract, you're selling the contract, and it's that simple. No property upkeep. The other real benefit is geographic reach. What does that mean? You can remote wholesale. So let's just say that you live in Miami, Florida. You don't have to only do wholesale transactions in the Miami area or even in the state of Florida. With wholesale, you can do it remotely anywhere in the U.S. So you can wholesale in any of the major metropolitan areas. They're generally the best because we have bigger buyer pools in those areas, but you can do wholesale anywhere in the U.S. And because of the way that we write the contract with low risk and the way that we sell them, it doesn't really matter where you acquire a property. We have acquired properties in remote areas. We've acquired them in dense population centers all over, in many different states, and you can do that with wholesale transactions. The only setback is trying to find them. Obviously, if you live in Miami, Florida, you're going to have some way of finding the opportunities in whatever other geographic location that you want to be in. But we call this remote wholesaling. You can do it anywhere in the U.S. if you live in the U.S. But the other cool thing is you can actually do it in Canada too. And there are wholesalers in Canada who are selling Canada and they're selling the U.S. They can do it remotely. They're not stuck by the geographic features of the U.S. or Canadian border. The processes are very similar. You're going to sell the property. Now, so let's talk about what some of the cons are or drawbacks to doing wholesale real estate. First is market knowledge and experience. With wholesale, you really have to have some market knowledge and experience if you're going to be very good in this area. You've got to know what investors in your area are willing to pay for a property you may acquire. So the percentage of after repair value is very good to know. There's some markets where investors won't pay any more than 70% of after repaired value. So for instance, if you were going to have a property that was worth $100,000 after it was repaired and ready to be put on the MLS, an investor's probably not going to pay you any more than $70,000 for that. But there's other areas of the country where they have markets that are at 80 or 82 or 85% of ARV because the markets are much stronger. There's a lot more buyers and there's a lot more competition from investors, and they're paying a little bit more for those products. So you need to know that so that you can negotiate the best deal as a wholesaler, and you got to have the expertise in the areas to know that. Again, you need to know the markets. You're going to need that additional market knowledge. So that is one of the drawbacks of being in wholesale. If you want to be successful at it, you're going to need knowledge and expertise. Number two, limited profit margin. If you're doing a true wholesale, you're going to be limited on your profit margin by what other investors are willing to pay for it. Unlike if you're trying to sell to a retail, buyer, so you buy the property, you fix it all up and sell in the retail, you've got the after repaired value, and you can push the envelope of of what somebody is willing to pay for your newly upgraded with all of these great updates that you put in it. With a wholesale transaction, you're going to be limited a lot by the market research that you do. You find out that investors are paying 70, 75, 80% in an area, and you may send the property out to begin with a little bit higher margin on it, but you're going to find that you're going to be limited pretty much by what the investors are used to paying in those areas and their costs in order to get a property to market. So wholesale can be a little bit limited on your profit margins in comparison to some of the other means or other options that we've talked about, the buy and hold and the fix and flip. The other thing is competition. The wholesale market has become very competitive. There's several people out there who are talking and teaching and coaching now on wholesale transactions where you rarely heard about this 20 years ago. It's become very competitive. In marketplaces like where I'm at in Phoenix, it's extremely competitive. We got the biggest wholesalers in the nation are here, and you're competing against them, plus everybody who's taken one of these how do you wholesale homes courses. So there's a lot of competition in the Phoenix marketplace. But even though there's a lot of competition, we still are able to, buy properties and wholesale the ones that we want to wholesale and flip the ones we want to flip and make, buy and holds out of the ones that we want to keep and retain. But competition will continue to grow as more people are getting into this and finding that there's an opportunity here to make money that's low risk, low impact, low investment, and they can take advantage of that. So competition can be a real challenge in the wholesale marketplace, and I hear that a lot of times from people trying to get into this space, is that they didn't realize how competitive it was and how many people. So for instance, you may get somebody on the phone by calling a mailing list, and you're calling through this call list. And you get somebody on the phone, they're like, "You're the fifth person today who's called me about purchasing my home," because there's so many more people out there competing for the properties that meet the criteria for potential wholesale opportunities. The fourth thing is legal risks. This can be a challenge in the wholesale. Now, we write our contracts to provide minimal risk, but there can be some legal challenges, more about governments than the contract. So, for instance, if you're in Illinois has enacted a law that restricts wholesale transactions to licensed realtors, which means you may have to go get a real estate license if you want to wholesale in Illinois. I've heard some other states are adopting those type of things. And so some people have come up with some other ideas, with innovation methods, with power of attorney methods and stuff in order to overcome these potential legal risks. But if you're going to do business in whatever state it is you're going to start in, you need to get some information about what's required in that state in order to wholesale and to dispose of properties that you've purchased for wholesale. The fifth thing is the pool and number of available properties. The pool and number of available properties when it comes to wholesale is very small. Typically on the wholesale side of things, you're looking around 5% of all available homes. The rest of the homes are going to sell on the MLS. They're going to sell to a retail buyer. They're going to use a retail real estate. They may go up for sale by owner to begin with, but the reality is only 13% of for sale by owner homes ever sell by the owner. The rest of them ultimately get listed by a real estate agent. So the pool and number of properties available is actually very small. And so one of the things that can be very frustrating for people who are in wholesale or just getting into wholesale is trying to find those diamonds in the rough, trying to mine those nuggets of gold that are out there amongst all of the properties that are out there, trying to find the 5 that may want to sell wholesale amidst the growing competition that's out there. So the pool or a number of available properties can be very challenging. And so sometimes once you find a niche or you find some place where you're a little bit better at those type of properties, it can get a little easier. That's why we always recommend that because the pool is so small, you've got to use a vast number of means in which to find these. Most of the big guys now, they're getting their best and most of their leads off pay-per-click, which is very expensive. Some of them are telling me that the cost to acquisitions are between $4,000 and $10,000 the cost to acquisition of a wholesale property, which means they have to figure that in their wholesale offers. So it can be a little bit more competitive on that side, but door knocking's still cheap, driving for deals is still cheap, postcards are still cheap, But you got to take advantage of all of these because the pool or number of available properties is a real challenge in this marketplace when you're wholesaling. So those are the 5 cons to go with the 5 pros. Wholesaling can be an extremely good opportunity for you. But again, like many other things, I recommend that you get a coach, that you hire somebody like the Whitwam Wealth Academy in order to help walk you through the process of becoming successful at wholesaling properties, so that you don't just spend your wheels, you don't spend a lot of time, you don't spend a lot of money on marketing that really you could have avoided by having the knowledge that you need to be successful in this area. Join me on the next message or next lesson of our podcast, and because that's where we're going to leave it today. You've been listening to the Whitwam Wealth Real Estate Podcast, and I hope you have enjoyed this episode. I want to thank you for taking time to listening. And if you found this episode of real estate, single-family residence options interesting and helpful, please subscribe, leave us a review. And if you have any questions, please let us know. We'd love to hear from you. You can always find the Whitwam Wealth Real Estate Podcast on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, iHeart Podcasts, YouTube, or wherever you enjoy listening to podcasts. This is Scott Whitwam. Be sure to join me on our next episode of the Whitwam Wealth Real Estate Podcast, where we're wealth building through real estate.